I'll admit, 20 minutes ago, I knew nothing about Carson Focht. I didn't know who this player was, nor do I know who this player was supposed to be, but the Vancouver Canucks drafted Carson Focht with their 133rd overall pick. This is a pick that was a little bit shocking at first because I didn't know the player, but after reading more things, I actually think I've formed an opinion on him that kind of spells out what kind of player he's supposed to be. Carson Focht is an overager. Let's get that out of the way first. Born in the year 2000, February 4th, he was passed over in last year's NHL entry draft, and he wasn't necessarily somebody who people were having their eye on this year, despite being an overager. In the WHL this season, he was just under a point per game, 64 points and 26 goals in 68 total games played. He had 9 points in 11 games in the playoffs, so he was a pretty consistent player out this year, and it was a big step up from last season where he played 69 games played and only had 33 points, and a total of 13 goals. So overall, Focht is a guy who did improve, and that should be noted. So let's go over to a few other draft websites to read up about what Carson Focht is as a prospect. This is what draftsite.com says about Focht. He's strong in almost all areas, what you want to see in a long-term prospect. The one significant area he hasn't grown in is scoring ability. It is difficult for me not to believe a team takes a chance that he eventually produces more goals. Going over to draftgeek.ca, this was an article posted 11 days ago, and it talks about Focht, says his areas of strength are high-level edge work, combination of edges and skills, and acceleration, and the areas of weakness, he has his head down quite a bit, he's not too physical, and he needs to translate. And the article actually talks about how Focht was a player who wasn't necessarily too good in his draft year. But it does talk about how he did elevate up his game, he got himself way more points, and he found himself an offensive flair. I watched a few of his highlights and I actually did see that. The highlights that I watched that are available on YouTube are highlights of his draft year, and in those highlights he is a guy who finds himself some good space. He's got a pretty good shot, but it's just that he didn't have too many goals last season, which is kind of interesting, but Focht is a sleek and slippery puck processor who makes his way through different pressure points in the offensive zone with ease, driving the offensive attack with deception and balancing his abilities with the puck. Gifted as both a scorer and playmaker who makes timely passes, releasing his shots and passes in a timely manner. Overall, Focht is a skilled, instincts-driven offensive center that is tough to contain and will continue to take over as he ages and develops in the WHL. Now, this little thing at the end of the Draft Geek article is really interesting right here. The natural talent is there. Focht is gifted, and he may max out to being a 100-plus point WHL player, but at some point, an NHL team will take notice and give him an opportunity at the professional level somewhere. So that's a very optimistic article, and usually, guys who get themselves 100-plus points in the NHL, they typically become solid AHL players, if not middle six AHL players, so what we're hoping out of this 19-year-old, 6-foot, 179-pound center is a solid few years in the WHL. We're going to hope for more points, and by the time he is a pro hockey player, he should be able to slot into Utica and potentially make a splash in the NHL if he's good enough. But overall, Focht is not a bad guy to get at a 5th round spot, especially since he is a guy who does show a little bit of potential, a guy who did grow, and a guy who did improve a ton from his draft year. So Focht overall is a player that I'm pretty okay with for the Vancouver Canucks. Hope you enjoyed this video, Social 99. And bye.